You're listening to Program Notes for the Florida Orchestra's Huff Family Foundation Masterworks series. I'm Andy Tefelsky, social media manager of the Florida Orchestra, classically trained percussionist, and the host of this podcast. In this episode, I will be talking about Emmanuel Chabrier's España, Manuel de Falla's Nights in the Gardens of Spain, Heitor Villa-Lobos' Choros No. 10, Alexander Borodin's Polovtsian Dances, and Maurice Ravel's Bolero, so you can dive deeper into the music anytime, anywhere. These audio program notes are authored by Kurt Loft, a local writer who has written about the arts in the Tampa Bay area for more than 40 years. You can find his full transcriptions at floridaorchestra.org. All right, let's dive in. Emmanuel Chabrier, 1841 to 1894, España. Performance duration approximately 8 minutes. Anyone who visits Spain, much less lives there, know its all-consuming beauty. Barcelona, Madrid, Toledo, Sevilla, Córdoba, Valencia, and countless small towns seem as if painted in oils under a warm sun, impressions that stay with you for the rest of your life. Emmanuel Chabrier apparently thought so during a vacation with his wife in 1882, evident in his evocative letters to friends. He also took a keen interest in the indigenous folk music of various regions, noting the tunes and rhythms of street musicians. Inspired, after returning to Paris, he began composing a Spanish-infused fantasia he called Jota, later renaming it España. This musical postcard made Chabrier famous overnight. Composers as diverse as Manuel de Falla and Gustave Mahler praised it, and the work further whetted the French appetite for Spanish exoticism, along with Bizet's Carmen, Debussy's Iberia, and Ravel's Rhapsody Espagnole. Performances of Chabrier's brilliant orchestral showpiece and the incoming royalties allowed him to live comfortably until his death from syphilis at age 53. The work opens with pizzicato strings, mimicking a plucked guitar, then muted trumpets introduce a punchy main theme 4 times, followed by a flurry of horns, bassoons, and cellos. A spirited rhythm quickens the pace before the strings play an expressive tune that evolves into fragmentary variations and a rousing, fiery climax. Note how cleverly Chabrier folds in the traditional Spanish Jota Aragonesa and Malagueña dances. With its bubbling colors, cadences, and organic orchestral textures, all tightly bound into 6 minutes of perpetual motion, España is equally at home on Masterworks and Pop's programs, making it a crossover favorite among listeners of different tastes. It's not surprising that moments after its premiere in Paris in 1883, the audience insisted it be played again as an encore. Manuel de Falla, 1876 to 1946. Nights in the Gardens of Spain. Performance duration approximately 23 minutes. As a boy, Manuel de Falla was a voracious reader, determined to become a famous writer. His fondness for tales and myths grew alongside his interest in music, and he realized that the two were hardly incompatible. He wrote the storylines or librettos for his own operas, as well as cultural criticism and political commentary, giving him access to prominent figures in the arts and government. Although a competent pianist, de Falla was no virtuoso, and large symphonic forms also forced him out of his comfort zone. So in his mid-20s, he settled into routine as a pedestrian composer of Spanish musicals known as zarzuelas, a sort of poor man's comic opera. He was also going broke. In frustration, he left for France and was in Paris when Stravinsky's Rite of Spring provoked a riot. Reveling in the excitement of such new sounds, de Falla turned his visit into a lengthy stay and began writing stylized Spanish music with a French flavor. One of his finest creations is Nights in the Gardens of Spain. 3 nocturnes for piano and orchestra that might be considered a model for Respighi's Pines of Rome from a decade later. The music is full of dark colors and a sense of mystery, like any garden at night. The 3 symphonic impressions include: in the Generalife, we visit a jasmine-scented garden in Alhambra, a region that had profoundly influenced the composer. A rippling piano suggests the sound of a flamenco guitar. A distant dance. It may not depict a specific garden, but the music includes an exotic dance drawn from the material heard in the opening section, led by the piano. The Sierra de Córdoba, the final movement, tinged in melancholy, suggests a garden in this ancient Andalusian city, the piano playing intimately against the full orchestra. The composer said the titles guide the listener but shouldn't be taken literally. Rather, they serve to evoke places, sensations, and sentiments. The music has no pretensions to being descriptive. It is merely expressive. Heitor Villa-Lobos, 1887 to 1959, Choros No. 10. Performance duration approximately 12 minutes. No one can accuse Heitor Villa-Lobos of being lazy. He composed some 2,000 works, ranging from solo guitar pieces to sprawling musical canvases for chorus and orchestra. Arguably the most significant Brazilian composer of the 20th century, he blended the music of urban musicians with the European classical tradition to form a unique and commanding voice. Villa-Lobos was a poor student and showed little interest in his classes at the Music Conservatory in Rio de Janeiro. But with a flair for the guitar, clarinet, and cello, he earned money by playing in movie theater orchestras. He also was drawn to the dark interior of Brazil, where he absorbed influences of African and Portuguese folk tunes that became part of his dynamic style. Villa-Lobos is best known for two musical sets, the 9 Bach-inspired Bachianas Brasileiras, and the 14 pieces that make up choros, a form of popular music. The most famous of the latter is the Choros No. 10 for orchestra and chorus from 1926. The music reflects the atmosphere of a rainforest, and we hear an exotic bird call played on the flute, then a wash of woodwinds in their highest registers. The brass add their tonal weight before the entire orchestra and percussion section celebrate with jarring rhythms right out of a Stravinsky ballet. Finally, the chorus sings an Indian chant the composer heard during his travels along the Amazon. Note the sonorous treatment of the words that Villa-Lobos creates from the folk song, Rend the Heart. The music ends on a rousing, full-throttled note guaranteed to wake anyone who happens to be dozing off. Alexander Borodin, 1833 to 1887, Polovtsian Dances. Performance duration approximately 14 minutes. Like many of us who struggle to make a living and pay our bills, Alexander Borodin was a moonlighter. By day, he worked as a chemist, and by night, he composed music. The late shift didn't pay well, if at all, but Borodin was more interested in dabbling in music than profiting from it. He puttered in a laboratory attached to his home in St. Petersburg, Russia, and after dinner retired to his study, joined by his wife, numerous cats, and his friends who always seemed to be stopping by. Some were fellow composers, and conversations might focus on Bach one night, the tenets of orchestration the next. Quote, as soon as he was free, he would take me into his living room where we occupied ourselves with music and conversation, end quote, said Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, a frequent visitor. Quote, in the midst, Borodin would rush off to the laboratory to make sure that nothing was burning or boiling over. Then he would come back again for more music and talk, end quote. Borodin composed slowly and intermittently, and left behind a relatively small catalog of works when he died in 1887. He spent 5 years composing a first symphony, and another 7 years piecing together a second. His large-scale folklore opera Prince Igor, an epic effort in his prized opus, tells the story of the battles of a Russian prince against the invading Polovtsian Khans in the 12th century. He died before finishing it, so Rimsky-Korsakov and Alexander Glasunov teamed up to edit it and complete the work for its premiere in 1890. It soon fell from favor, except for 2 exceptions, the overture and the Polovtsian Dances from Act 2. The tune Gliding Dance of the Maidens, often with chorus, is among the most rib-sticking tunes ever written, comparable to the best of Tchaikovsky, Cole Porter, or Paul McCartney. The orchestra tosses an exotic theme in F-sharp minor back and forth among woodwinds and brass, before cueing a rhythmically driven dance as contrast, then concludes with a timpani-pounding coda. Tony Bennett popularized the music in the song Stranger in Paradise from the 1953 Broadway musical Kismet, which borrowed a number of themes from the opera. Maurice Ravel, 1875 to 1937, Bolero. Performance duration approximately 13 minutes. Ravel was a small man, precise and routine, well-groomed and impeccable in manners and dress. His musical taste leaned toward traditional form and structure when much of the world around him was genuflecting over Wagner or debating the merits of atonality. While in many ways he mirrors his fellow countryman, Debussy, Ravel wasn't a modernist or groundbreaker, preferring to build off the scaffolding of Mozart or draw on the bounce of a Baroque dance. He was a master orchestrator in the vein of Rimsky-Korsakov, and this allowed him to spin shimmering webs of fantasy and sensuousness, kaleidoscopes of color that varied from exotic to grotesque. listen to Daphnis and Chloe, and you hear nature awakening at dawn. With La Valse, Viennese waltz goes mad, and Pavane for a Dead Princess rides on a melody few composers could ever match. Then we have Bolero. Written in 1928 for an obscure ballet, it was intended to support dancers, not serve as a standalone in the concert hall. One reason Ravel expected it to fade into oblivion. He called it orchestration without music. Today, Bolero enjoys unflagging popularity, a hybrid of both serious and light programs. Yes, Ravel gave us a study in repetition. The same C major pattern repeats itself 13 times against a snare drum, but it would be an injustice to call it simplistic. A long crescendo based on two themes in the flavor of Spanish flamenco, it moves forward on an insistent rhythm that grows in volume, intensity, and brilliant color. Bolero begins quietly and ends demonically, a traditional form turned on its head with exhilarating effect. The music makes few demands on listeners and performers, except the poor snare drummer who never gets a break. This season, we wanted to give you a few key things to listen for in each Masterworks program. Here is what to keep an ear out for in this program. Starting with Emmanuel Chabrier's España, listen for how Chabrier makes use of two dances indigenous to Spain, the fiery jota of Aragon and the sultry malagueña of Malaga. In Manuel de Falla's Nights in the Gardens of Spain, listen as three distinctive nocturnes unfold, each depicting a garden, the music hinting of the French Impressionism of Debussy. In Heitor Villa-Lobos' Choros No. 10, listen for a solo flute imitating the song of a rare Amazonian bird called the blue-black grosbeak, which the composer heard during his travels into Brazil's deep interior. In Alexander Borodin's Polovtsian Dances, Broadway musical fans will recognize the 1953 Tony Bennett hit Strangers in Paradise as the soaring melody gliding dance of the maidens from Act 2 of Borodin's opera, Prince Igor. And lastly, in Maurice Ravel's Bolero, the music is an incessant crescendo. Listen for the volume slowly increasing to the rat-a-tat of a snare drum. Thank you for listening to Soundwaves with the Florida Orchestra. Enjoy the concert.